Welcome to this live chat with Commissioner Nicolas Schmit, European Commissioner for Jobs and Social Rights. Today, the Commissioner will be taking your questions on social policy for a sustainable recovery. We have already collected quite a lot of questions over the last 48 hours on our social media platforms, and more questions continue to pour in. You are watching us on EBS with a slight delay, and we would like to apologize for that. We had some technical issues today. Let me just add that we have interpretation today in Italian, French, German, Spanish, and Polish. So without further ado, I will ask the first questions we have received from you today to Commissioner Schmit. And we have a question from Italy. What are the measures to increase labour market inclusion in Europe? Will there be a shift towards smart work driven by EU policies? How does the European Commission intend to increase the sustainability of the workers' rhythm of life and a more fair distribution in purchasing power?
Well, first I think the inclusion into the labour market is one of the issues of the recovery, because if we have no recovery, it will be much more difficult to have a more inclusive labour market. But at the same time, we have to insist a lot on the quality of work. So it's not just the number of jobs which are important, it's the quality of jobs, the status of people who work, diminishing the precariousness of work. And here I think, which is one main aspect, is to invest a lot in skilling, upskilling, training of workers, but also training of young people coming into the labor market. So here, inclusiveness and training, investing in knowledge is very important. Now, certainly the smart work, that's part of the evolution of the digital economy. And here also we have on one side preparing people for this digital economy by giving them the right digital skills, and this has to be broadened. 90% of all jobs now have some kind of content, of digital content, and unfortunately not 90% of our workforce have the necessary digital skills. So we have really to invest a lot and rapidly into this. But going with skills is also the working conditions. What are the working conditions on the platforms? So this is an issue for the Commission. We will come up with proposals quite soon, this year or at least next year. So we will start this process this year. And then fair working conditions means also fair wages. And here, I think the day before, no, was it yesterday? It was yesterday. We have launched now the minimum wage consultation, the second phase of that. So we will come up with a proposal on minimum wages in Europe, but not just minimum wages. Wages as in more general terms. We need absolutely strengthening collective bargaining in order to have better wages, fairer wages all over Europe. And I think this is an overall approach of how we have to prepare and manage the labour market for the future, for the recovery, but also for big changes in the economy due to digital, but also due to the greening of our economy.
The next question we have received is from Jacopo in Italy on Instagram and Matthias from Germany on Facebook, which are asking, what is the European Commission doing to strengthen the EU's social dimension in order to become as strong as its economic dimension? Should social policies be standardized at EU level?
Well, I think a lot has already been done. Even the previous Commission has already integrated the social dimension at many levels, especially also when we are talking about the European semester. Now, social recommendation occupied a large portion of this recommendations. And this we go on. We have now an important tool which was adopted in 2017. That's the Pillar of Social Rights. And this is not just a declaration. These are very concrete principles and proposals. And we are about now to translate these proposals, these principles in concrete policies. The minimum wage is one of them. Skilling, the right to be skilled, the right to be upskilled is proposal number one. So all this is translated now into concrete policies. Now, this means that there is an awareness now that the social dimension, there cannot be a good economic dimension without a strong social dimension. There is no contradiction between the economic side and the social side, because we want to build up in Europe a social market economy. That's what the President of the Commission has announced. But we want also that this social market economy is an economy for people. And this is obviously, there's a strong need for this social dimension. And I think this Commission is very much committed to that. And we will have an action plan on the social pillar by next year. And also the different issues, also the integration of the social dimension in the recovery plan shows that we are on the right track, what the social dimension, the strengthening of the social dimension means.
We have also received a question from Peter on Facebook, who asks, how can he look for jobs in another European country, EU country, and plan for the future?
Well, I think the right to free movement is a fundamental right in Europe, and is for everybody, and especially also for young people, a fantastic achievement, which has to be defended by all means, I would say. Every young person has the right, or even those who are less young, have the right to go to another member state and try to find a job there. We have different instruments facilitating, by the way, this job search. We have a system which is called EURES, where there are tens of thousands or hundreds of thousands of jobs announced in different countries, and where every European citizen or citizen from living in an other European member state can use and try to get a job in a different member state, so another member state. So this is absolutely possible. That's a right. You can go and switch to another member state, at least for 3 months, and look for a job there. Or you can already look for a job though you are still in the member states where you are residing.
The next question comes from Luis on Facebook, who says that he's working in the tourism sector and asks, how can he be helped?
Well, this is a bad time for tourism. The Commission has adopted this plan to help to revamp the tourist sector, which has been hit. Probably it's the sector which has been hit the hardest by the corona crisis. But slowly, nevertheless, with the fact that the pandemic is slowing down, also the tourism comes back. So we have to find out how we can combine safety, health safety, and promoting again tourism. Now, this year probably the tourist sector will not be at the level or exactly the same as it was previously, especially those countries depending a lot on tourism. But certainly we have to support those who are working in tourism. Short-time work is probably one answer. Some kind of income guarantee is important also for those who work less or eventually cannot work. In tourism, we have a lot of seasonal workers, so they are in trouble. I've read that, for instance, in some countries, there are people asking, how can I survive the whole year because I cannot work the normal 6 months I normally worked, but now it will be maybe reduced to 3 months. So these are things we are very much aware, and I think we have to tackle these problems and help people at least to overcome this very difficult year for tourism. But at the same time, I would say, well, tourism is not dead this year. It will come. It will be back, and we have to make sure that people can move in safety.
So we have received quite a lot of questions related to the current situation of interpreters in the institutions and how they can be helped. And the question is the following. You say that nobody should be left behind, but what about EU independent conference interpreters who have been left without income from the European administrations?
Well, I think it's absolutely right that nobody should be left behind, and that we should take care of those who have specific working status, like self-employed people, and they are self-employed or independent workers. And as far as I've aware, there are a lot of measures which have been now taken for the interpreters. So they get some income, which has been guaranteed even during this period where they cannot work. Some guarantees for the future also. And I think it's obvious that the Commission, which tries to defend the interest of all workers, has also to take it fully into account the situation of those who work for the Commission. And I think this seems to now to be on track. There's a dialogue with the Association of Interpreters. So I think we are on the right way to find solutions for this category, this important category, because we could not work without their help, without their knowledge. This is indispensable for our institutions, and I'm confident that the right measures are being found, and that also the interpreters can be satisfied.
Next question we received on Twitter is from Graban Chias, who asks what can be done or will be done to make sure that funds are not misused?
Yes. Well, I think we are very much focused on controlling the use of funds. I think I've been a minister in a country, so I know that probably the controls being applied at European level are much stricter and much more developed than in many member states. So, and this is important because we have to give people trust in the use of European funds, because it's the money of our taxpayers all over Europe. And so I'm very confident. And when I look at the statistics, the portion of funding which is perhaps not 100% corresponding to all the regulations and all the rules is very small. And we have a lot of controls, with the Court of Auditors being one of the major controls at the end. And this shows that the European funding is really very much controlled, and the misuse of these funds are absolutely the exception.
Another question is from Fernando on Twitter as well, who asks how the EU intends to provide direct support to SMEs to innovate, create employment and both economical and functional value.
Well, I think the SMEs are the backbone of the European economy in terms of value created, in terms of regional balances, in terms of the local economies, but also in terms of employment. And the SMEs have been hit by this crisis, many SMEs, because they are in supply chains or they are in sectors which have been hit, like tourism or hospitality and so on. And now we try really to maintain this absolutely indispensable economic substance of Europe through guarantees, which has been partly done through national guarantees, but also the European Investment Bank has put into place guarantees, and certainly in the recovery plan or facility, a lot has to be focused on the SMEs, because also SMEs have a big innovative capacity, and this has to be supported, and especially also because now they have run out of liquidity. We have to make sure that SMEs have liquidity in order to be able to survive. So I think there are a lot of measures here. There's one I want to stress also, that SMEs are key for the training and qualification of young people. When we are talking about vocational training, SMEs play a fundamental role. So I've started working with the SMEs representatives in Europe, how we can support SMEs in that field, how they can continue training young people, because these are the people they need in 2 or 3 years. So we should not have some kind of a blank situation at that level. So this is also an important support which we can give to SMEs to play their role in the economy, but also in the society.
We have received a question from Alessandro on Instagram, who asks, are there any plans to bring back from China some of the manufacturing, at least the key sectors for securing independence in a time of crisis, for masks, face shields, etc.?
Well, I think there is an important debate now going on supply chains and the relocation of activities. This will not be automatic and will not be as easy as one might think. Now we have started to produce masks. That's fine, but this is a very small segment of our economy. Now, I think there is a reflection going on now, even in big companies, how they organize their supply chains, because we have discovered with this health crisis also the vulnerability of our production chains, and I think this will have a change in relocating some productions. I see personally also an opportunity through the digitalization and robotization. Here there's a new opportunity how you can produce and be competitive at the same time, because certainly you create less jobs, but you create jobs. You create an ecosystem around the new plants, and you have the possibility to have flexible production and also innovation. So I think that will be a process which will not be immediate, but it will be a process where new activities come back to Europe, and where finally there is a big opportunity for European industry. That's part also of the plan for industry, which has been adopted by the Commission a few weeks ago. How can we rebuild our economic or our ecosystems around different industries? Well, pharmaceutical production is certainly important, because we have discovered that we are very, very dependent in this area, and this is perhaps something we should reflect on.
The next question is from Thomas on Twitter, who would like to know more regarding the upcoming European Commission initiatives on disability and aging. The question is, what specific amounts and budgetary programs will be allocated to support the implementation of these initiatives?
Well, people with disabilities certainly are a priority in our social policy. First, fighting discrimination. I think this is the first thing we have to do. There are still a lot of discrimination around, also against people with disability. And here we have to be strict and apply the European directives on equal rights and fighting this discrimination, especially also on the side of access. This is an important element, but also access to labor markets, and reducing also this prejudgment. You say prejudgment, or the fact that you think that a person with disability is not up to certain prejudices. Yes, and this is one thing everybody has to be involved in. And here I think Europe has done a lot of work. But at the same time, we have to create also an overall environment, especially also for the disabled person, to give them opportunities to be part of our society. And that's what we call a social inclusion. And in the new ESF Plus, 25%, and we are talking about more or less 100 billion euros, 25% of this money has to be devoted to social inclusion. And part of that money has to go also to fight discrimination against people with disabled people, or also to improve the conditions for aging people. So these are elements which are part of the next ESF.
We have received a question from Bianca on Facebook. The pandemic crisis has hit hardest on cities and led to new groups of people in vulnerable situations, the new urban poor. Poverty is territorial and exacerbated by the crisis in deprived urban areas where people are at higher risk of unemployment and social exclusion. So the question is, how is the Commission ensuring that EU funding is channeled to where is needed the most in cities and not only to national programs?
Well, first, it is absolutely right that this crisis has created new categories of poor. Those who have lost their jobs, who had no social protection, for instance, those working in atypical working status. And we have reacted on that by making the fund, which is called the Fund for the Most Vulnerable, more flexible, and also increasing the resources of this fund. But this is an urgency measure, an emergency measure, which is fine, but which does not resolve the problem which is mentioned. I think the new poor situation in cities are linked to jobs, because these people do not find the right jobs. Second, it's a question of housing. Housing is very important. We have the number of homeless people has increased, even in some ways dramatically increased, and this is also very, very much an urban phenomenon. So we have to tackle all these issues together: housing, jobs, trying to find jobs for these persons, supporting also, this is an issue for social inclusion, supporting these people also by training programs, because if they are not trained, if they have not the right skills, they cannot find the right jobs. All this has to be organized, and I think it's important that when we are talking about social inclusion programs, that part of this money has to go to these very vulnerable groups. And I agree, these are in big cities. We could talk now, giving examples from big cities. These are good examples. And I think this is also for our social cohesion a big issue, because what happens in the big cities is, as we see now in other parts of the world, is a very sensitive issue.
We have received a few questions on gender gap, pay gap issues. The first comes from Adeola on Facebook, who says that the COVID pandemic provided ample evidence of women's invaluable contribution to society and the economy. However, the care sector, including the health sector, is also characterized by poor wages and working conditions and a gender gap in the EU. What initiatives will you take to close the gender pension gap? And let me just add another question in the same vein we received just now from Angel on Facebook, who asks if the EU will push for equality in salaries across all of the EU member states to ensure more salary equality for the same jobs across Europe.
Well, I think equality of the wage equality between men and women is in the treaty since the Treaty of Rome. Unfortunately, it has not been applied. It has not been implemented because we still have a gap around, I think, 16% all over Europe in an average. But in some member states it's lower, and in some member states it's much higher. So for this Commission, I think the President of the Commission has made out of the equality, and especially gender equality, an absolute priority. There's a Commissioner Dalli, who is in charge of that. So we really have as an objective zero wage gap as soon as possible by the end, even of this Commission, or quite close to that. And the first step to do that is wage transparency. And here there will be a proposal on wage transparency, very important, because in order to fight the gap, you have to know exactly what is the gap, because there is some kind of a secrecy around wages, and especially when the gender gap is there. Well, nobody knows exactly what wage everybody earns. There are good examples, by the way. There's the example of Iceland. They have introduced a very efficient system on wage transparency, and we have seen that as a consequence the gap has reduced dramatically. So this is the first thing the Commission will do, and pension gap is depending a lot on wage gap, but it's also depending on the normal career of women. And if women stop working for part of their work because they have to take care of the kids, well, they will lose this for their pension. So what the Commission has done on the care aspect, on better combining family and work, all this contributes also to better balances at the level of pensions. So I think, just to say, this is a high priority. This implies certainly the European level, it implies the national level, but it involves also very much social partners, because it's also a culture which has to be really established in companies. There are a lot of companies who are applying that, but there are still companies who ignore that, and I think this is where we have to give a strong push.
Adiola on Facebook had also related questions on the funding in the next recovery plan, Next Generation EU, and she asks, will you support and call for investments in a care deal for Europe, building on the European Pillar of Social Rights and the gender equality strategy adopted at the beginning of March? This would also help create quality jobs for both women and men.
Yeah, I just refer to the previous question where the care sector has been mentioned, and which is a sector, I think 70% in this sector, also the health sector, are women. And I must say this crisis has revealed something which we should have known and which we knew, which is that we honor insufficiently the work which is done in these sectors, be it care, be it the health sector, in most of our member states. Perhaps not in all. There are some where the situation is a bit better. And I think there has to be really a revision. What is the value of work? We have discovered that the value of work in many situations has shown us what the importance of the health sector is, but not only the health sector. People working in the supermarkets, who have made it possible that everybody could just buy food. Well, they are not very well paid. So I think there has to be an awareness about the real value of work. And this is a big issue because it goes deep into the question of the level of wages, the right to have fair wages, fair wage bargaining, collective bargaining. But also it's a question about inequality in our society. And what has been done in the health sector by the doctors, by the nurses, is of incredible value. And I think we should not forget that after the crisis. We have applauded them every evening in some places, but now it's the time to say, okay, we have to revise a bit the hierarchy which has been established in our societies also at the level of wages. And the Commission cannot change that. We do not have the power to impose that. But I think this is a debate we have. We have to have European-wide and in national context. And certainly I will very much push to discuss this issue, because our health system, and with all the people working in this system, is the best guarantee for a resilient society. Because if we do not have a strong health system, we cannot have a strong economic system, because this crisis was very much depending on the capacity of our health system, of the number of people working in the health system. And I must say they have done a fantastic job, and this has to be recognized.
The next question comes from Renato on Twitter, who asks, when will the European Commission propose a reinforced youth guarantee that reflects the current situation and state of things?
Well, this is very soon on our agenda. It's on the 24th, I think, of June. We will come up with the revised and revamped youth guarantee, also as a response to the present crisis, where there is a risk, obviously, of an increase of youth unemployment. And we want to have a better youth guarantee, a reinforced youth guarantee with sufficient resources. But we have to have a more global approach to youth unemployment. I mentioned the question of training, of apprenticeships, helping young people to get an apprenticeship. But we have to also to help all the young people coming now on the labor market to find a job and to find an opportunity. And this will be not so easy. And therefore we will launch, and this has been clearly written also in the recovery plan. We will launch a program which we call youth employment support. Yes, youth employment support. And the aim of that is to help young people not to be the victims of this crisis, not to be the lost generation again. I think this is a very high priority for all of us.
The next question is from Heather on Twitter, who asks how the social services and social enterprises will be specifically supported by the recovery plan, which was announced by the Commission.
Yes, we in my mission letter, the president of the Commission asked me to work on an action plan on social economy, social services, social economy in a very broad sense. And certainly social economy can be an important element also in the recovery process. So nothing makes it difficult to use also these funds to support, to develop social services and social economy. This is also part of the resilience, by the way. If we have a strong social sector, a strong social economy, this creates jobs, but it creates also social services to help those who are the losers, who are the most vulnerable. We have talked about the people with disability. We have talked about the poor, and we have to build up efficient social services, but also through the social economy, new opportunities for a lot of people, like the people with disability. So I think there are a lot of possibilities to use funds to make our economy more resilient.
The next question concerns seasonal workers, and it comes from Georgina on Facebook. She says most of the seasonal workers in farms travel abroad to work as part of the European single market. As the European food market is essentially reliant on the contribution of those workers, she asks the EU to consider devising an EU-wide coherent strategy to protect these workers, no matter which EU country they work, and ensure they have medical insurance and social security. While Cosmin on Facebook asked why the mobility restrictions didn't apply for seasonal workers too. Why do we have these double standards?
Well, I would say the mobility restriction would not have been the best solution. The point was better protection for the people, because the conditions under which these people have moved were not good, and we have seen that in many places in Europe. A lot of people, seasonal workers, have been infected due to bad conditions of being moved around, but also especially in housing. Because when you are together in a small room and there are 10 people together, that's increasing very much the risk. Now, as it has been stated, these people are essential for the food production in many places in Europe. And they are normal workers, which should benefit from the normal social guarantees and standards. And we have, again, seen now that this is not the case. We have been blinded a bit in the past. Now I think there's a movement which has started in the European Parliament, in the Commission, but also in member states, to say, well, it's not fair that these workers do not get the normal conditions, the normal social protection, health protection, and so on. Minimum wages, by the way, they are absolutely entitled to. And I will issue what I have announced, also because I had different exchanges with the unions representing these workers. I have also talked to the European Parliament, which will organize a debate on seasonal workers soon, that we will issue guidelines on the situation of seasonal workers. The fact is that seasonal workers have to be treated like any other worker. This is not the case, and this is really a problem. Also in relation to housing, we have to make sure that they have to have decent housing conditions, as they have to have social protection where they work, and they have a right to the wages and minimum wages or collective bargaining conditions which are applied in the country where they work. So this will come. We will have guidelines. We will have a debate on seasonal workers. And I think we have to make sure that these workers, which are indispensable, by the way, have the right protection.
So as we are coming slowly towards an end of this live chat, I have one more question for you today, Commissioner Schmit, from Germany. It's Stefan, who is asking on Facebook, what kind of steps does the EU Commission take against the growing gap between the rich and the poor?
Well, this is a difficult question, because the Commission cannot be the only one to do that. I think there is a debate now on inequality in our society. We have mentioned about the wages paid to those who are considered to be indispensable workers, frontline workers, who have saved our societies, who have saved and guaranteed our health. So there has to be a global reflection on the value of work, on the value of professions, redefining this hierarchy which exists. There has to be an issue on taxation, certainly, redistribution, and certainly the Commission can give impulses and stimulate this debate. We have no competence in taxation, especially not taxation in relation to individuals. But this is a real issue. If we want to keep our society together, if we want to take some lessons out of this crisis, we cannot forget the debate on inequalities. It's not me, it's Christine Lagarde, who said recently there are three big issues for Europe, and perhaps beyond, when we look what happens in other parts of the world, including in the US. It's globalization. How do we redesign the globalization? And one of the second priority is certainly inequality. That's Christine Lagarde saying that. And she said that, by the way, when she was at the IMF also. So I think we have to redesign our policies, taking on board this issue of more equal societies. And this means also giving better opportunities to everybody. Skills are key in an economy, in a digital economy, where knowledge and digital skills are very important, very determinating. So opening this opportunity to everybody is very important. But poor people do not have these opportunities. It starts there when we talk about children at school. And therefore, the idea of introducing a child guarantee is very important, because when you are a poor child and you do not have the opportunities to get digital skills because you do not have a computer, and we discovered that now, because when we had to refunction our education, well, we have discovered that a lot of kids had no computer. So we have to start there. And inequality, fighting inequality, reducing inequality is an issue for the Commission, but it's an issue for all the member states and for our whole societies.
Thank you very much, Commissioner Schmit, for being with us today, and thank you very much for all of you who followed us on EBS. All the questions which were not answered, unfortunately, today will be answered by our social media team. So thank you again, and hope to see you soon. Thank you.